$50,000, Mr. Cole. Take it and walk away. Grant Weller's voice was smooth enough to sound kind. The old motel sign buzzed above them, half dead in the desert wind. Nathan Cole stood on the porch with one hand on the contract, the other resting near Ranger's head. The German shepherd didn't bark. He just stepped in front of cabin 5 and sat down. Grant smiled. It's a worthless room. Nathan looked at the locked door, then at the dog. Then why are you so desperate to buy it? Grant stopped smiling. To understand that moment, you need to know what Nathan found behind the key rack. Nathan Cole was 42 years old when he learned that a life could be emptied without a single raised voice. He came home just after dusk, still wearing his faded delivery jacket, dust from the interstate clinging to his boots, the smell of diesel and cold coffee following him into the apartment. The place was too quiet before he even turned on the light. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind that waits for someone to come home. This was the other kind, the kind that has already made up its mind. On the kitchen table sat a manila envelope, squared neatly with the edge of the placemat, as if whoever left it there had taken time to make the ending look polite. Beside it lay the apartment key his wife had carried for 9 years, and beside that a white coffee mug with a faint rose-colored mark drying along the rim. Nathan stood there a long moment, one hand still on the back of a chair, staring at that mug. The papers should have been the thing that hurt. The empty closet should have been the thing. But it was the coffee, still carrying a little warmth near the bottom, that reached into him and turned the knife slowly. She had been there recently, close enough that the air had not yet forgotten her, close enough that if his route had ended 20 minutes sooner, he might have heard the door close. Ranger sat by the refrigerator, silent and steady, his black and tan coat dull in the overhead light, his amber eyes fixed on Nathan with a patience no person in that room had ever managed. The German shepherd did not bark. He did not pace. He simply watched as if he knew that grief was something you approached carefully. Nathan opened the envelope, divorce papers, signed, initialed, clean. The kind of clean that felt almost cruel because it left nothing messy enough to argue with. He checked the bank account next, not because money could explain anything, but because numbers were sometimes easier to face than feelings. $90. That was what remained in the account they had shared through 9 winters, 3 apartments, 2 used trucks, and all the small promises people make when they still believe promises hold. $90, a quiet apartment, and Ranger's old vet bill folded in his glove compartment. Nathan sat down slowly. The chair creaked under him like it had been waiting to say something. He had spent years in the army learning how to keep supplies moving, how to stay awake through long nights, how to read a map by bad light, how to swallow worry and call it discipline. Later back home, he learned how to drive lonely highways and make conversation with gas station clerks who never remembered his name. But nobody had taught him what to do when the life he came home to was gone. And the only living thing left to greet him had 4 paws and eyes too kind to look away. Ranger rose then and crossed the kitchen, nails ticking softly against the floor. He rested his heavy head on Nathan's knee. Nathan put one hand between the dog's ears, and for a second his face changed. Not broken exactly, just unguarded. The way a man looks when he realizes he has been carrying a weight so long he mistook it for part of his own bones. He thought of his father then, Samuel Cole, though he did not want to. For 27 years, Nathan had believed the same story. Samuel had walked out, chosen a dry road in New Mexico over the people who needed him, and never looked back. His mother had said it until the sentence became a law in Nathan's mind. A man who leaves once will leave everything. And yet, buried beneath all that anger, there were memories that refused to behave. Samuel's hands smelling of motor oil and black coffee. Samuel fixing a broken porch step without saying he had noticed it. Samuel once telling him beside an empty road, "Some folks don't need a speech, Nate. They just need one safe place to stand." Nathan had spent most of his life pretending that sentence meant nothing. Sitting in that kitchen with $90 left, and Ranger breathing against his knee, it began to sound less like advice and more like a door he had never opened. What Nathan did not know was that far south, outside a fading town called Dry Creek, New Mexico, an old motor court named the Blue Lantern was waiting in the dust. Behind a wooden key rack in its dark little office, hidden inside a wall, was something Samuel Cole had left for him. Not money, not an apology anyone could spend. Something heavier than both. Nathan did not sleep much that night, though he lay down because Ranger kept looking at him, as if sleep were not a suggestion but a duty. The apartment seemed larger after midnight, every room stretched by absence, every ordinary object suddenly holding its own small accusation. A second toothbrush still stood in the bathroom cup. A blue sweater had slipped behind the laundry basket, forgotten or spared, he could not tell which. On the counter, the divorce papers waited with the quiet patience of bad news. Nathan turned off the kitchen light and sat on the living room floor with his back against the couch, one hand resting on Ranger's ribs, feeling the slow rise and fall of the dog's breathing. Ranger had come into his life 5 years earlier, after Nathan left the army, and discovered that civilian silence was louder than any road he had ever driven. The dog had been trained for veteran support, though Nathan used to dislike that phrase. Support sounded too soft, too public, too much like admitting something in him had not returned home cleanly. So he told people Ranger was just his dog, just a German shepherd with a graying muzzle, careful eyes, and a habit of standing between Nathan and doors in crowded places. Just a dog who woke him when the old dreams tightened around his throat. Just a dog who knew, before Nathan did, when a room had become too much. In the army, Nathan had not been the kind of man who talked about fear. He worked logistics, routes, inventories, supply lines, schedules, fuel counts. Long hours of making sure other people had what they needed before they knew they needed it. There was honor in that, though nobody clapped for it. He had learned to be useful. Useful men did not complain. Useful men checked straps, counted crates, fixed mistakes, drank burnt coffee, and kept moving. The trouble was, after he came home, nobody told him how to stop moving. He became a delivery driver because highways made sense to him. A route had a start and an end. A package had a label. A truck either ran or did not. People were harder. Marriage was harder. Love, he had learned too late, could leave without leaving instructions. Before all of that, before uniforms, before delivery routes, before he became a man who apologized for taking up space, there had been Samuel Cole. Nathan tried not to think about him, but the mind has a cruel loyalty to the places that hurt it. Samuel had been a quiet man with sun-browned arms, a narrow face, and hands that always smelled faintly of motor oil, black coffee, and sawdust. He repaired things other people would have thrown away: radios, hinges, cracked stools, a toaster that worked only if you held the lever down with a butter knife. He spoke little, not because he had nothing inside him, but because whatever lived there seemed to have trouble crossing the distance to his mouth. Nathan remembered him best in fragments. Samuel standing under the porch light at dawn, tying his boots. Samuel humming off-key while changing the oil in an old pickup. Samuel driving with the window cracked, letting desert air move through the cab even in winter. And then, just as sharply, Samuel gone. No long explanation, no scene worth replaying. Only a missing truck, an empty hook where his jacket used to hang, and Nathan's mother moving through the house with a face that made questions feel forbidden. Over the years, her version of the story hardened into truth. Samuel had left because some men were built that way. Samuel had chosen distance. Samuel had made his life smaller so he would not have to share it. Nathan believed her because anger is easier to carry when somebody hands it to you already shaped. Yet there was one memory that never fit. A roadside pullout west of Pueblo, a flat tire, wind pushing dust across the asphalt. Samuel tightening the lug nuts while Nathan stood nearby, useless and frustrated. An older man had been sitting alone beside a stalled car, head bowed, palms open on his knees. Samuel finished the tire, walked over, gave the man a bottle of water, and sat beside him without asking a single question. Later, when Nathan asked why he had done that, Samuel said, "Some folks don't need a speech, Nate. They just need one safe place to stand." In the dark apartment, with Ranger breathing against his leg and the life he had trusted folded into an envelope on the table, Nathan finally understood the ache inside that sentence. Maybe needing help was not weakness. Maybe being left did not mean a man had no worth. Maybe a safe place was not a luxury, but the first mercy. Near dawn, Ranger lifted his head and looked toward the kitchen, toward the papers, toward the keys, toward whatever came next. Nathan followed the dog's gaze, and for the first time that night did not feel completely alone. The letter arrived 6 days later, folded into the kind of plain white envelope people overlook until it changes their life. Nathan found it wedged between a final utility notice and a grocery store flyer. His name typed across the front in black ink, the return address belonging to a law office in Dry Creek, New Mexico, a town he had not spoken aloud in 27 years. He stood by the mailbox with Ranger at his side, the morning air sharp enough to make his knuckles ache, and for a long moment he did not open it. Some names have weight, some towns do too. Dry Creek had always lived in Nathan's mind as the place his father went after leaving, a dry dot on a map somewhere south of forgiveness. Inside the apartment, he slit the envelope with a butter knife because he could not find the letter opener his wife had taken, or thrown away, or packed by mistake. The paper inside was formal, careful, and cold in the way legal language can be cold even when it is carrying the last trace of a human life. Samuel Everett Cole had passed away 3 weeks earlier of natural causes. He had left no spouse, no business partner, no close local family. What remained of his estate had been assigned to Nathan Cole, his only son. Nathan read the sentence twice, then a third time, waiting for his body to respond in some proper way. Grief, anger, relief, anything. Instead, he felt a hollow pause, like standing in an empty warehouse after the machines have shut down. Ranger nudged his hand. Nathan kept reading. The estate consisted of one property, the Blue Lantern Motor Court, located 12 miles outside Dry Creek on County Road 18, including 6 detached cabins, 1 office structure, 1 old service shed, and surrounding land. County assessed value, $1. Nathan made a small sound then, almost a laugh, though it had no humor in it, $1. Samuel Cole had disappeared for 27 years and left behind a motel worth less than the coffee Nathan had bought that morning at a gas station. It was so perfectly bitter that he nearly admired it. He called the number at the bottom of the letter because practical things were easier than emotional ones. A woman answered on the third ring, her voice low, steady, lightly sanded by age. Maggie Whitcomb speaking. Nathan gave his name. There was a pause. Not long enough to be rude, just long enough to mean something. "I wondered when you'd call," she said. He asked if the letter was real. She said it was. He asked if the property was livable. She exhaled softly. "That depends on what you mean by livable." She told him the roof over cabin 2 leaked, the office needed wiring checked, the neon sign had not fully worked in years, and the last paying guest had come through before most people carried phones smarter than road maps. "Then why did he keep it?" Nathan asked. Maggie did not answer right away. In the quiet, he heard papers shifting on her desk. "Your father was not an easy man to know," she said at last. "But he was not careless." The words irritated him more than they should have. Careless was the kind version of what Nathan had spent years calling Samuel in his head. "He left," Nathan said. Maggie's voice softened, though it did not become sentimental. "Maybe you ought to come see what he left behind." That evening, Nathan packed what little still felt like his. 2 duffel bags, his army field jacket, Ranger's food, a dented thermos, the divorce papers he could not yet throw away, and $90 in cash because seeing the number on a screen had begun to feel like being watched. He did not tell anyone he was going. There was no one left who needed to know. At dawn, he and Ranger headed south in the old pickup, leaving Colorado under a sky the color of worn steel. The highway stretched out ahead, long and indifferent, past fenced fields, truck stops, low hills and towns with boarded diners and flags snapping in the wind. Ranger rode in the passenger seat, calm as a priest, occasionally turning his head toward Nathan, as if checking that the man behind the wheel had not vanished into himself. By late afternoon, the land had changed. The mountains fell back, the horizon widened. New Mexico opened around them in rust gold and pale blue, beautiful in a way that did not try to comfort anyone. Nathan drove with both hands on the wheel, thinking of $1, 27 years, and a father who had chosen this emptiness. But somewhere beyond the next stretch of road, the Blue Lantern was waiting, and with it, the first part of a truth Nathan had spent half his life refusing to need. Dry Creek appeared near sundown, not all at once, but in pieces, the way tired towns often do. First came a leaning water tower with the town name fading under years of sun, then a closed feed store with dust gathered in the windows, then a gas station where one pump still worked and an old man in a canvas cap lifted 2 fingers from a rocking chair as Nathan passed. The place did not look abandoned, exactly. It looked like it had learned to survive without asking for attention. Nathan parked outside the county office, a low brick building with a flag snapping hard in the evening wind. Ranger stepped down from the truck first, shook road dust from his coat, and stood close to Nathan's leg, as if the town itself needed to be approached with caution. Maggie Whitcomb met them at the front door before he could knock. She was in her early 60s, silver hair pinned at the back of her head, glasses hanging from a chain, her face lined in a way that suggested weather more than age. She looked at Nathan for a moment too long, not rudely, but with the quiet surprise of someone seeing the sun inside the man. "You have Samuel's eyes," she said. Nathan almost turned back to the truck. Instead, he held out his hand. "I'm here for the keys." Maggie nodded, as if she had expected that answer and forgiven him for it already. Inside, she handed him a small envelope, a property folder, and a ring with 6 old brass keys. One of them had a blue plastic tag, cracked down the middle. "Road's easy enough," she told him. 12 miles east. County Road 18. You'll think you missed it, then you'll see the sign. Nathan asked if anyone had been staying there. Maggie glanced at Ranger, who had settled beside the door with his ears half raised. "Not paying," she said. "Not for a long while." Something in the way she said paying made Nathan look up, but she was already closing the folder. "Your father kept things his own way." He wanted to say his father had kept everything his own way, including the truth, but the words felt too old to be useful. So he drove. The road out of Dry Creek narrowed quickly, slipping past scrubland and low fences, past telephone poles that leaned into the wind like tired men. The sky burned orange, then copper, then bruised purple at the edges. Ranger sat upright now, nose lifted toward the cracked window, taking in the desert as if it were a language he nearly understood. Nathan saw the sign just when he had started to believe he had gone too far. The Blue Lantern Motor Court. The words hung from a rusted metal frame, half hidden by mesquite and dust. Above them, the outline of a lantern leaned crookedly against the sky, its blue glass broken in one corner. Below it, the old vacancy letters remained, though several bulbs were missing, and the whole thing looked less like an invitation than a memory trying not to disappear. Nathan pulled into the gravel court. 6 cabins curved around a small office with a sagging porch and a bell mounted beside the door. Wind moved through the place, dragging dry leaves along the ground. A screen door tapped softly against its frame. Tap, pause, tap like a finger that had been waiting years to be noticed. "Worth $1, Nathan muttered. Ranger did not seem to agree. The shepherd stepped down and walked slowly across the gravel, not sniffing randomly, not wandering the way dogs do in new places. He moved with purpose. Nathan unlocked the office and pushed the door open. The smell met him first, old wood, sun-baked dust, coffee long absorbed into the walls, and something faintly sweet like cedar shavings in a drawer. Behind the counter hung a wooden key rack numbered 1 through 6. Keys dangled from every hook except 5. Nathan stared at the empty hook longer than he meant to. Then Ranger gave a soft breath and walked to the far window, where cabin 5 sat in the deepening blue of evening. Its curtains were drawn, its step had been swept. On the porch, an old chair faced the road. Nathan crossed the court and unlocked it with the blue-tagged key. Inside, cabin 5 was not beautiful, but it was clean. A narrow bed, folded blankets, a lamp, a can of coffee. A small note on the table in handwriting Nathan had not seen since he was 15. For the next one. The room held no explanation, only readiness, and that somehow unsettled him more than decay would have. Behind him, Ranger lay down across the threshold, facing outward, as if he had already understood what Nathan had not. This place was not dead. It had been keeping watch. Nathan spent the first night at the Blue Lantern in the office, because the couch there looked less lonely than the bed in cabin 5. He told himself it was practical. The office had the breaker box, the landline that no longer worked, and a roof that seemed more certain than the cabins. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. Cabin 5 felt prepared for someone, and Nathan did not yet know whether he was allowed to be that someone. He found an old blanket in a storage cabinet, shook the dust from it on the porch, and spread it over the cracked leather couch. Ranger circled twice beneath the counter, then settled with his back against Nathan's boots, the way he always did when Nathan's breathing turned shallow. Outside, the desert night widened around the motor court. Wind moved through dry grass. The loose screen door tapped once, then rested. Somewhere far off, a truck passed on the county road, its sound rising and fading until the silence closed again. Nathan lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, one blade hanging slightly lower than the others. He thought about the note on the table. For the next one. Not for a guest, not for a customer. For the next one. The words bothered him because they sounded less like business and more like mercy. Near 3 in the morning, Ranger lifted his head. Nathan felt the change before he saw it, the dog's body going still against his leg. "What is it?" he whispered. Ranger stood, crossed the office without a sound, and stopped in front of the wooden key rack behind the counter. The rack was plain pine, darkened by years of hands and dust, with 6 brass hooks screwed into it and small numbers burned above each hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Every key hung where it should, except the 5th. Ranger stared at the empty space beneath the number 5, then looked back at Nathan. "It's a key rack," Nathan said, too tired to be patient with mysteries. Ranger did not move. He stepped closer, touched his nose to the lower right corner of the wood, and gave one soft huff. Not a bark, not a command, a suggestion. Nathan got up with a groan, joints stiff from the couch, and ran his fingers along the edge of the rack. At first, he felt only dust and old varnish. Then, near the bottom, his thumb caught a narrow groove. The whole rack shifted slightly under his hand. He frowned. "You've got to be kidding me." He found a screwdriver in the desk drawer, along with paper clips, dried pens, and a roll of yellowed receipt tape. The screws came loose one by one, complaining as they turned. When the rack finally pulled away from the wall, a small rectangular compartment appeared behind it, cut neatly between the studs, and covered with a thin board stained the same brown as the paneling. Nathan stood there in the dim office light, the key rack hanging from one hand, his pulse suddenly loud in his ears. Ranger sat beside him, calm as if he had been waiting for the man to catch up. Inside the compartment was a leather ledger, thick and soft at the corners, and beneath it a dented blue cookie tin tied with a length of cotton string. Nathan took the ledger first. On the front, pressed into the leather by hand, were the words, "The Blue Lantern Book of Cabin 5. He opened it carefully. The first page held his father's handwriting, older than Nathan remembered, but unmistakable. "Cabin 5 is never charged." Below that in smaller letters, "Keep 5 open." Nathan sat behind the counter and began to read. The entries were not accounts in the usual sense. No rates, no balances due, no credit card numbers. Just names, dates, and a few careful sentences. Frank D., truck driver too tired to make Amarillo, coffee shower one night, no charge. Marlene T., retired nurse, car trouble, and no cash until Friday. 2 nights, no charge. Robert H., veteran, papers lost, needed help calling the VA office. 3 nights, no charge. Helen and Arthur Pike, engine failed, both scared to ask for kindness. Supper in office cabin 5, no charge. Page after page, year after year, Samuel Cole had written people back into the world with nothing more than ink, a clean bed, and the stubborn refusal to measure them by what they could pay. Nathan read until the letters blurred. Ranger laid his head on Nathan's boot. For the first time since arriving, Nathan touched the page not like evidence, but like a pulse. Nathan did not open the blue cookie tin right away. He sat with the ledger spread beneath the weak desk lamp, until morning seeped pale and thin through the office blinds, turning the dust in the room silver. Ranger slept lightly beside him, one ear always awake, his body pressed close to Nathan's chair as if the old shepherd knew the man was standing somewhere dangerous inside himself. The ledger had already changed something, though Nathan could not have named it yet. Anger was still there, stubborn and familiar, but it no longer stood alone. Around it now gathered other things, confusion, shame, a reluctant tenderness, and the strange ache that comes when a person realizes a story they hated may not have been the whole story at all. At last, he untied the cotton string around the tin. The knot was simple, the kind Samuel would have tied, tight enough to hold, easy enough to undo if you knew how to be patient. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them, some yellow with age, some newer, stacked in no perfect order but handled with care. Return addresses came from little towns across the Southwest and farther beyond: Tucumcari, Flagstaff, Lubbock, Wichita, Grand Junction, Tulsa. The first letter was from Marlene T., the retired nurse Samuel had written about in the ledger. Her handwriting leaned forward as if still in motion. She thanked him for 2 quiet nights, for coffee without questions, and for calling her by Mrs. Turner when she felt like the world had reduced her to a problem. Nathan read that sentence twice. The next letter came from a truck driver who said he had pulled into the Blue Lantern too tired to trust himself on the road. "You didn't make me feel foolish," the man wrote. "You just handed me a towel and said the shower takes a minute to warm up." Another was from a man named Robert, who had found his way back into the VA system because Samuel sat with him through 3 phone calls and never once sighed. Letter after letter, the language changed, but the meaning did not. People remembered a bed made clean, a porch light left on, a pot of coffee, a man who did not ask for proof of suffering before offering a chair. Nathan felt something loosen behind his ribs, and he hated how much it hurt. Near the bottom of the tin was an envelope with his own name on it. Not Nate, not son. Nathan Cole, written carefully, as if Samuel had feared the wrong name might send the truth elsewhere. His fingers paused over it. Ranger lifted his head and watched him, quiet, steady, asking nothing. Nathan opened the letter. Samuel's words were plain. They did not beg. They did not decorate themselves. "Nathan, if you are reading this, then I have run out of road." Nathan swallowed hard and kept going. Samuel wrote that he knew Nathan had been told he left because he wanted a different life. There was some truth in leaving, he admitted. He had walked out of a house where love had become locked rooms and words had become weapons people did not have to shout to use. But he had not walked away from being a father. He wrote that he sent money through a church account for years, that he wrote letters returned unopened, that he stayed away because Elaine believed absence would make the wound cleaner. "I was wrong to let silence do my talking," Samuel wrote. "Silence is a poor messenger. It loses too much along the way." Nathan lowered the page, breathing through his nose like he had been struck by weather. Ranger rose and put his head under Nathan's hand. The letter went on. Samuel had bought the Blue Lantern after a bad winter, and one good man giving him shelter when he had none. Cabin 5 became his way of paying that mercy forward. "We do not own much in this life," he wrote. "Mostly we are given a little time, a little road, and a chance to make someone feel human again. If I failed you in words, I pray this place tells you what I could not." Nathan sat there until the sun reached the floorboards. He did not forgive everything in that moment. Real forgiveness does not arrive like lightning. It comes more like dawn, slow and uncertain, touching one corner of the room before the whole place knows it has changed. But he folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside the tin, and for the first time in 27 years, he let himself say his father's name without making it a sentence of blame. By noon, Nathan had stopped pretending he was only staying long enough to settle paperwork. A man could lie to himself in many ways, but dust had a way of telling the truth. It clung to his sleeves, settled under his fingernails, rose in soft gray clouds whenever he opened a cabinet or dragged an old chair into the sun. The Blue Lantern was not asking to be saved all at once. It was asking for one honest thing at a time: a hinge tightened, a window washed, a porch swept clean. The kind of work small enough to begin and large enough to keep a man from falling back into himself. Nathan found a toolbox in the service shed. Its red paint faded almost pink. Samuel's initials scratched into the handle with a pocket knife. Inside were pliers, screwdrivers, a roll of electrical tape, half a box of nails, and a wrench wrapped in an oily rag. He stood there a moment with the box in his hand, feeling the strange intimacy of using tools another man had left behind. Ranger waited in the doorway, watching him with that patient shepherd face that seemed to say grief was allowed. But so was work. Nathan started with the office screen door. It had tapped all night in the wind, tap, pause, tap like an old memory trying to get in. He reset the latch, tightened the loose screws, and oiled the hinge until the door closed with a soft, decent click. Then he swept the office, shook out the faded rug, wiped the counter, and filled 3 trash bags with paper cups, dead flies, brittle receipts, and the kind of clutter that gathers when nobody expects tomorrow to come. In the afternoon, he opened the windows of Cabin 5. Warm desert air moved through the room and lifted the curtains as gently as breathing. Ranger walked in, sniffed the corners, then lay down beside the bed as if approving the effort. Nathan stripped the old sheets, washed them in the town laundromat, and bought a cheap blue blanket from the dollar store with money he should not have spent. $90 did not stretch far. But something in him could not bear the thought of Cabin 5, waiting for the next one with a blanket that smelled of storage. When he returned, an older man in a tan jacket stood near the office porch, holding an empty water bottle and looking embarrassed by his own thirst. Didn't know if this place was open, the man said. Nathan almost answered the way a tired man answers strangers, quick and closed, but Ranger rose before he did. The dog walked to the porch, stopped beside the man, and sat down, calm as a judge and kinder than one. Nathan looked at Ranger, then at the man. "It's open enough," he said. "Come sit a minute." The man's name was Leonard Price. He had been driving from Arizona to Oklahoma, taking back roads because they were quieter, but the heat had worn him down, and his old sedan was running hot. He said all this with his eyes on the ground, as if every detail needed permission. Nathan brought him water first, then coffee, then a sandwich from the cooler. Leonard held the cup with both hands. "Most folks ask what went wrong before they ask your name," he said. Nathan leaned against the counter, feeling Samuel's ledger in the drawer behind him. "Not here," he answered, and the words surprised him by sounding almost true. Leonard stayed one night in cabin 5. He offered $23 and a handful of quarters in the morning, but Nathan shook his head. No charge. The phrase felt awkward in his mouth, borrowed and too large, but Leonard's face changed when he heard it. Not relief exactly, something quieter. The look of a man being handed back a piece of himself he had not known he'd dropped. After Leonard drove away, Nathan opened the leather ledger to a blank page. His hand hovered for a long time before he wrote March 14. Leonard P. needed water, coffee, and one night without being measured. Cabin 5, no charge. Ranger rested his chin on Nathan's boot while the ink dried outside. The blue lantern still leaned under years of neglect. The neon sign was dark. The roof still needed patching. There was more broken than fixed. But the office smelled faintly of fresh coffee now. And Cabin 5 had a clean blanket. And Nathan had written his first name in his father's book. That was not restoration, not yet. But it was a beginning. Grant Weller arrived 3 mornings later in a black SUV so clean it looked misplaced against the dust of the blue lantern. Nathan saw the vehicle before he saw the man, rolling slowly off County Road 18, tires whispering over gravel, sunlight flashing across the windshield like a coin turning in the air. Ranger was lying in the shade of the office porch, but he lifted his head at once. Not alarmed, only attentive. By then Nathan had learned to trust the difference. Grant stepped out wearing pressed jeans, polished boots, and a pale button-down shirt that had never known honest sweat. He was perhaps 50, silver at the temples. Handsome in the practiced way of men who had learned that a calm voice could open more doors than force ever could. He smiled before he reached the porch. "Nathan Cole?" Nathan wiped his hands on a rag. He had been replacing the weather stripping around Cabin 3, a job that looked simple until the old wood began telling on every year it had survived. "That's me." Grant held out a business card. Weller Regional Development, Land Acquisition and Community Infrastructure. The words were smooth enough to mean almost anything. "I'm sorry about your father," Grant said. Nathan had heard the sentence several times now, and each person placed it differently. Maggie had said it like a folded flag. Leonard had said it like a cup of coffee offered with both hands. Grant said it cleanly, efficiently, as if sorrow were one courtesy among many. "Thank you," Nathan replied. Grant looked around the motor court, letting his gaze move over the tired cabins, the cracked neon sign, the office porch, the weeds growing through the gravel. "This place has character," he said. Nathan almost laughed. Character was what people called damage when they did not have to live inside it. "It has work," Nathan said. "That too." Grant smiled again and glanced down at Ranger, beautiful dog. Ranger did not move toward him. He simply watched. Grant explained that his company had been studying the Dry Creek corridor for months. New charging stations, a small travel plaza, maybe a coffee franchise, maybe a convenience store, maybe something that would bring jobs and traffic back to a road people had mostly forgotten. He spoke respectfully. That was the danger of him. He did not sound like a man trying to take something. He sounded like a man offering relief. "Your father held out for years," Grant said. "But things change. Properties age. People move on. You're not obligated to carry another man's burden. Another man's burden." The phrase slid under Nathan's ribs and found the tired place there. He thought of the unpaid bills in his glove compartment, the divorce papers folded in his duffel, Ranger's upcoming appointment, the pickup making a new noise every time it climbed a hill. Grant reached into a leather folder and placed a printed offer on the porch rail. $50,000, cash closing. We handle fees, transfer, everything. You walk away clean. Clean, there it was, the word that made ruin sound washable. Nathan stared at the number, $50,000. Not enough to make a man rich, but more than enough to make breathing easier. Enough to pay the truck. Enough to find a quiet apartment. Enough to stop counting every gallon of gas, every can of dog food, every repair he could not afford. For one brief, shameful second, the blue lantern changed before his eyes. It became boards, pipes, cracked glass, tax forms, liability, risk. It became one more thing needing more than he had to give. Ranger stood then and walked off the porch. Grant took half a step back, but Ranger only crossed the gravel to cabin 5 and sat in front of the door. No bark, no growl, just that old shepherd stillness, steady and terrible in its gentleness. Nathan looked at the dog, then at the dark window of cabin 5, where the blue blanket lay folded and Samuel's ledger waited in the office drawer. Grant followed his gaze. "Sentiment is expensive," he said softly. "So is forgetting," Nathan answered before he knew he was going to. Grant's smile thinned, but he remained polite. "Think about it overnight. Men like us, we know when a position can't be held." Nathan did not correct him. He only took the offer, folded it once, and said, "I'll think." After Grant left, dust hung in the air long after the SUV disappeared. Nathan sat on the porch beside Ranger until the heat began to fade. In his hand was the kind of paper that could buy him distance from pain. Behind him, in a drawer, was the book of people Samuel had refused to measure by money. That evening, Nathan opened the ledger again. He read the names slowly, not as debts, not as charity, but as proof. By midnight, the $50,000 offer no longer looked like rescue. It looked like a price tag tied around a promise. The next morning, Nathan drove into Dry Creek with Grant Weller's offer folded in the inside pocket of his jacket, where it sat against his chest like a second, colder heartbeat. Ranger rode beside him, muzzle lifted to the cracked window, desert air moving through his fur. The town looked different in morning light, less romantic, more honest. The feed store was still closed, the diner sign still missing 2 letters, the sidewalk still holding more dust than footsteps. Nathan parked outside the county office and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He had come there intending to ask one question: how fast could a man sell what he had never asked to inherit? But when he looked at Ranger, the dog was already watching him, calm and expectant, as if he knew some doors were harder to open than others. Maggie Whitcomb did not seem surprised to see him. She was behind her desk, sorting papers into careful stacks, a mug of tea cooling beside her keyboard. "Mr. Weller came by," Nathan said. Maggie took off her glasses. "I figured he would." Nathan pulled out the offer and laid it on her desk. "He says my father held out for years." "He did. Why?" Maggie studied him for a long breath. "Because Samuel knew the difference between land and a place." Nathan frowned. "That sounds like something people say when they don't have to pay property tax." Maggie smiled faintly, not offended. "It does, doesn't it?" She opened a file drawer, removed a thick folder tied with red string, and placed it between them. "Your father came in here 9 years ago with a thermos of coffee, a stack of handwritten notes, and more stubbornness than most lawyers care to meet before lunch. Inside the folder were maps, county records, and a document titled Community Shelter Easement." Nathan read slowly, legal language pressing hard against his patience. Maggie helped where the words became tangled. Samuel had placed a permanent restriction on Cabin 5 and the small strip of land around it. It was to remain available as short-term emergency lodging for adults in transit, adults in hardship, or adults temporarily without safe shelter. No fee could be required. No commercial buyer could remove that purpose without triggering a transfer of use rights to a local nonprofit trust. "So Grant can't build his plaza," Nathan said. "Not the way he wants to." Relief should have come. Instead, Nathan felt a heavier thing settle over him. "Then why make me come here at all? If the law protects it, what does he need me for?" Maggie's eyes softened. "Law can keep a door from being sold. It cannot keep coffee in the pot. It cannot wash sheets. It cannot ask a tired man his name before asking for his story." Nathan looked down at the papers. He thought of Leonard Price holding a coffee cup with both hands. He thought of Samuel's letter, of silence losing too much along the way. He thought of all the years he had mistaken absence for the whole truth, because nobody had been brave enough, or kind enough, to open the right door at the right time. That afternoon, Grant returned to the Blue Lantern. He parked in the same place, stepped out with the same polite smile, and looked less certain when he saw Nathan waiting on the porch with Ranger beside him. "You've had time," Grant said. Nathan nodded. "I have." Grant's eyes flicked toward the office. "I can improve the offer a little. Not much, but enough to make this easy." Nathan almost admired the word easy. It was a soft word, a tempting word, but not every easy thing was mercy. He handed the folded contract back. "No," Grant blinked once. "No. My father left restrictions on Cabin 5. Grant's expression tightened, then smoothed itself back into business. "Restrictions can be negotiated. Maybe by people who think promises are paperwork." Nathan's voice stayed quiet. He was surprised by that. There was no heat in him. No need to win. No wish to shame the man standing in front of him. Only a steadiness he had not felt in years. "You came here with a price. My father left me a promise. I know which one weighs more." Grant looked past him toward the cabins, toward the dark neon sign, toward all that aging wood and stubborn silence. "You'll regret turning down money." Nathan glanced at Ranger, whose ears moved slightly in the wind. "Maybe. But I've already spent enough years regretting what I misunderstood." Grant left without another argument. The SUV rolled back to the county road, carrying its clean offer and clean language away in a ribbon of dust. Nathan stood there until the sound disappeared. Then he went inside, opened the drawer, and took out Samuel's ledger. On a blank page beneath Leonard's name, he wrote only one sentence. "The law kept Cabin 5 from being sold, but someone still has to keep it human." Ranger lay at the threshold, facing the road. The blue lantern was still broken in a dozen visible ways, but something invisible had been repaired. Nathan stayed. Not because staying was easy, and not because the blue lantern suddenly became beautiful under the forgiving hand of morning. It did not. The roof still complained when the wind came hard from the east. The office floor still dipped near the counter. The neon sign still failed more often than it worked, buzzing in short, tired breaths before going dark again. But some places are not restored by miracle. They are restored by repetition. A broom across a floor, clean sheets folded at the foot of a bed, coffee measured into an old tin pot before sunrise. A name written carefully in a ledger so no one passed through unseen. Nathan learned this slowly, the way men like him learned most tender things, by doing them before he fully understood them. He patched Cabin 2 with donated shingles from a roofer in Dry Creek. He rewired the porch light with help from Maggie's brother, who accepted payment in coffee and silence. He sanded the office counter until the old wood shone through its scars. Ranger made his rounds every evening, moving from cabin to cabin with the grave patience of a night watchman, pausing longest at Cabin 5, where the door was never locked when the weather turned bad. Nathan placed a small card on the table there, beside a clean towel, a bottle of water, and a lamp with a blue shade. The card said, "Rest first, explain later if you want to." He had written it 3 times before the words felt right. Not too soft, not too proud, not charity dressed up as kindness, just permission. Over the next months, people came the way weather came, sometimes expected, sometimes not. A traveling mechanic whose truck gave out near midnight. A widower driving without a destination after selling the house he could no longer bear to enter. A woman on her way to care for her older sister, too tired to keep her hands steady on the wheel. A retired teacher who had lost his wallet and was ashamed of how quickly the world became difficult without plastic cards in it. Nathan did not ask for proof of pain. He asked their names. That became the rule he never wrote down because Ranger seemed to understand it already. Name first, story later, judgment never. Some stayed one night, some stayed 2. Most tried to pay, and Nathan would shake his head and say, "Cabin 5 is covered." Covered by whom, they sometimes asked. Nathan would glance toward the old ledger, toward the photograph of Samuel he had finally placed behind the counter, and answer, by someone who understood roads. Winter came quiet that year, not with heavy snow, but with cold desert evenings that turned the gravel silver and made the stars look close enough to hear. On the first night the temperature dropped below freezing. Nathan climbed a ladder beneath the old sign with a box of replacement bulbs, his fingers stiff, Ranger watching from below. He worked slowly, fitting each blue bulb into the lantern frame, tightening wires, testing the switch, failing, trying again. The first 2 attempts brought only a faint buzz. The third gave a weak flicker. On the fourth the sign woke. The blue lantern blinked twice, then held. Beneath it, the word vacancy glowed unevenly but clearly, spilling soft blue light across the gravel court, across the office windows, across Ranger's lifted face. Nathan stood on the ladder with one hand still on the frame, unable to move. He thought of $90. He thought of a cold coffee cup in an empty apartment. He thought of 27 years spent believing the wrong ending. He thought of Samuel alone in this same blue light, keeping a room ready for strangers because love, when it could not find its way home, had found another door to hold open. Later that night, Nathan opened the ledger to a fresh page. Ranger lay at his feet, breathing deep and slow. At the top, Nathan wrote, "Nathan Cole, keeper." Then below it, in the plainest handwriting he could manage, he added, "Keep 5 open." Outside, a car slowed on the road. Ranger lifted his head. Nathan looked toward the blue light falling across the window and felt, for the first time in years, not fixed, not finished, but standing. And sometimes, for a man who had lost almost everything, standing in the right place was enough to begin again. If this story stayed with you, let me know which moment hit you the hardest and where you're watching from. And if you believe places like Cabin 5 still matter, subscribe and come back for the next story.